Let's go into the second body paragraph here. Now, on the one hand, what are we going to write here? Of course, we're going to write on the other hand. And the next thing we need to do is to present our opinion. Again, we need to make it very clear to the reader what our opinion is throughout the response. We made it very clear that this is not our opinion because we wrote those who believe. So naturally over here, we're going to write I, or we're going to write my, some sort of personal pronoun being used here. So on the other hand, maybe I'll write my view is that. My view is that. So on the other hand, my view is that this conflict, so we're not writing teenage conflict, we are using demonstrative pronouns to reference. My view is that this conflict is important because, so a slightly different structure, but the exact same idea. You want the view and you want the argument. The view and the argument. The view is that it's important and the argument comes after because. My view is that this conflict is important because it can help teenagers to write. So now we could use develop. So we haven't used the noun, we can use the verb. If we sit with it a little bit longer, we might be able to think of a good synonym. For example, mature. It can help teenagers to mature. You could use something else. It can help teenagers to find their own voice is a nice idiom, but lots of different things that you could write here. The important thing is you have your view and you have your argument. Okay, support sentence, same kind of thing. Again, this is because. I know you don't want to be repetitive, so let's sit with it. Another thing that we can say instead is just this is due to, or the reason for this is. It's nothing spectacular. Again, these cohesive devices should just help the reader to follow the essay. They shouldn't be looking at these devices and thinking, wow, they should just be almost not noticing them. So the band descriptors actually say, incoherence and cohesion for band 9, uses cohesion in a way which attracts no attention. So that's the main idea of cohesion. So the reason for this is that, again, we got to think of another word for conflict. Maybe we can extend it and create a phrase from it instead. Something like, by having disagreements. So the reason for this is that by having disagreements, teenagers, what's another word for teenagers? Adolescents. Notice with a TS, not with the CE, because we're looking at the people. The reason for this is that by having disagreements, adolescents can form their own opinions. Maybe form, and then there's that word develop as well. So you can create it and then you can develop it. So form and develop their own opinions. Again, we've got an example. So instantly into the for instance, we use for example, we'll now use for instance. For instance, a child may grow up in a family of, we would say, meat eaters. Notice the hyphen here, very important for the punctuation, although it is difficult to know when to use them. So for instance, a child may grow up in a family of meat eaters but feel very strongly about not eating meat. Okay, now this is interesting because I've ended the sentence here, but I need to extend it. It's not enough. There's no idea here about voicing an opinion, about forming an opinion, about justifying it to yourself, about conflict. There's no conflict here. No conflict between people anyway. So I want to write it in my next sentence, but of course in my plan, I've gone with a different route. All I need to do is be willing to change my plan. This is an important point to make about planning. Do not feel trapped by your plan. You should be able to modify it as you go if you need to. So what I'm going to do instead here is I'm going to remain with the same example, and we're going to look at the alternative, not of no conflict in general, but the alternative of this specific example. So no conflict, or stay quiet about being a vegetarian, and then the negative result of that. So, she'll be against principles. So, for instance, a child may grow up in a family of meat eaters, but they'll feel very strongly about not eating meat. If this child does not voice their opinion, it's okay to use there. It's gender neutral. When we know we're not dealing with a plural, you don't have to write his/her all the time. So you can just write there. So if this child does not voice their opinion, they will be going against their principles. So I've got 4 sentences here. This leaves me with a space to open up one more, where I can look at the alternative of that alternative. So it's like an alternative on top of an alternative, but it drives the point home at the very end. So I could say, however, if this child, or if they, referencing, if they are willing to engage in conflict with their parents, their conscience, oops, I've spelt that wrong, haven't I? Their conscience will be much clearer despite the, what's a negative word? A word for feeling negative. Let's go with the word agony. It's a bit strong, but it puts the point across. Despite the agony of the argument. Okay, so however, if they are willing to engage in conflict with their parents, their conscience will be much clearer despite the agony of the argument. We've got the first conditional being used twice in a row. That's absolutely fine. Both scenarios are very possible. You would be absolutely fine to write the second conditional as well and just argue that it's a hypothetical example. Either one is fine here. But let's just check the word count. So you've got 2 to 8. So we've just set it up really nicely for that conclusion. Conclusion only needs to be about 30 or 40 words. And we've got 32 words to write before we hit the minimum word count. So we're right on track. So here we went for, in the end, we went for topic sentence, support sentence, example, alternative and results of the example, and then the alternative of that alternative and the result. So can be quite a good technique as well. Uses a lot of complex grammar like conditionals throughout. Okay, so conclusion. Again, we had a template, and what we need to do is summarize both the views and the arguments for the views, and we need to give our opinion as well. You can do this in 2 sentences. I'm going to try and do it in 1. The first reason for that is that it saves time, and the second reason is that it introduces complexity again, so it's very strong. So nice and simple to begin with. In conclusion, really doesn't matter how you start your conclusion as long as it's logical. So in conclusion, perfectly fine. And then just like we did up above with the although, we had a subordinating conjunction. We're going to use another one. We're going to say despite. A little bit trickier to use this one, but it's a good challenge. So despite. When you use despite, it can be best to start with the argument and then move to the view. So the argument for the top one is about damaging relationships. So despite the danger of damaging relationships, which teenage conflict can create. Okay, so we've used the view at the end and the argument at the beginning. So despite the danger of damaging relationship, which teenage conflict can create, it is my firm belief that, nice little bit of opinion language, but absolutely essential for the task, because we need to be very clear about what our view is in the introduction, in the body and in the conclusion to present a clear position throughout the response. It is my firm belief that this time of friction, similar to conflict in the way that we're using it here. This is quite an advanced usage of the word friction. It's not just rubbing together, but it is in a way, because it's like people rubbing against one another in terms of their emotions. It is my firm belief that this time of friction, so this period of life, this time of friction is essential, important. What else did we have? Necessary. What's another one? Let's go with vital, crucial. Lots to think about here. These are the words that you need to have a lot of synonyms for, because they come up all the time. Vital, crucial, important, essential, necessary, things like that. So it is my firm belief that this time of friction is a vital step on the path to. So a nice collocation here. Step, path, those words often seen together, so use them together, is a vital step on the path to becoming, to teenagers becoming, we'll come back and use that word again, and that's okay, it doesn't matter too much, becoming mature. And nice bit of word formation here. I'm going to put two words together and I'm going to join them with a hyphen. Independently minded. Independently minded. So you're joining an adverb with an adjective there. Adults. Let's look at the word count. 266. So we are more than enough over on the word count. You won't have, of course, a really quick word count tool on the day, but over time you will develop a sense of what is 250 words and what is not 250 words, and that should suffice on the day, because you don't want to spend too much time going back and checking individual words. So if I needed to, I would go back and check my work now, looking for all of those things that I mentioned in the checking your errors lecture. I don't need to do that because I'm pretty confident that the language here is quite good, but that's what I would want you to do on the day if you had the time, and hopefully you will have the time. So as I warned you, this was always going to be a long lecture. Hopefully you haven't found it too long and you found it quite helpful in terms of how you can see how the structure, how the essay progresses logically and clearly. But if you do have any queries or questions, as always, you know where to find me, and we can now comfortably move on now into the remainder of this course. Just a few lectures left, so I'll see you in the next lecture.